Okay, when we last left off, we had made our window, which is looking pretty good. Now I want to concentrate on this little side console over here, which is going to look basically like this. Here we go. This is Westerham. There we go, there's our console. So I've adjusted the size of it to be a little higher, so it's not such a low-slung piece of furniture, because it's meant to be a media console, but we're using it kind of as a buffet, but it is going to be the exact same style. So use that as my reference, and I've just made the size whatever I want. Okay, so you can see we have drawers here. We're going to have sliding doors over here, and then just the simple legs. And then we're going to have to map it nicely for the wood. Now, I think what I'm going to do is you start from scratch on this and use this as the basic shape and just show some of the modeling techniques that I would use here. If you want to know more about building furniture, and especially like organic furniture and just high poly furniture, I have a class all about that. And really, it deserves its own class because it's a lot of information. But also some basic tips and tricks here for modeling some furniture that is high poly, but it's not really organic shaped. So I think what I'm going to do on this one is just use the basic shell here. So let's take out everything except for the outside. It's just delete that. And we'll select the border here and just come back kind of like that. And then we can cap that off. Packed her okay, so there's a basic shell of our furniture. This is basically just a box with the front chamfort and then beveled in for that look that we want for the mid-century modern piece of furniture. Now, if you look at the image you'll do, it's got these kind of rounded pieces. Well, just this one around a piece. It comes down right in the center here as a divider that we will just create as a separate object, and you can split it into 3 parts. So I have kind of my measurements here. This can just be a render a bowl spline, but let's make it render with a lot of sides just to make sure that there's no fastening in that thing. And then we can turn it right into another poly or leave it however we want. And then we can just crash it in up here. Go to about right there and about right there. And then just put it in a place in the top. You are only moving in the X direction, should be right about there. That should work just fine. So make sure. Yeah, I should have left it as a spine, so I could adjust the diameter and make sure that's right. Now I could go here and scale it, but I think the diameter is luckily just about right about an inch. I could scale it in just the XY direction like this to make it bigger still. Maybe we'll leave it like that to accentuate it a little bit. That looks good. Now we need to think about how this thing would be built in actuality. So let's say there's a divider here that comes back to the back, and that doesn't need to be editable. We can just go to the spline subobject mode here and maybe offset it. Good outline. Make sure we're on center and outline it from the center like that just to make a little rectangle that can be extruded. That's up in the right place right about there. And then extrude it, and you can be a lot cleaner about where everything lines up and snaps to each other. But in this case, we don't really need to make a drawer to sit in there, and make sure to leave a little gap here. You don't want to snap there because you want to see a little gap. That's how it would be built, with a nice tight gap right there. Make those corridors and kind of eyeball it to right about there. Let's make that gap a little bigger so he can definitely see it when we render on all sides, and it's going to be about that size right there. And then we can just extrude. Of course, a couple of different things we could do. We can make the whole journey like this. Let's do that. And then we can put it into place. This part is a little bit of overkill, obviously. We want to make the scene very detailed. But making the actual drawer behind is overkill, because there's just no way we would ever see it. But hey, we're going to do it anyway. Let's just turn that into a basic get it poly again. And I like doing that. because then then it's all just about pushing and pulling instead of using modifiers so much, which I tend to find a little easier. Now, if this was true, or let's see, well, let's make it an actual drawing, or don't want to just be a box. This is the part that's really overkill, totally unnecessary. But showing you how to use all these tools is important, if you don't know how. And again, polymodeling is something that definitely requires its own course. And I have courses that go over it in depth here. I'm just giving you tips and tricks on how to do some basic furniture. So that juror looks pretty good. You could put a slight microchip for it by selecting the face, holding out Control, going to Edge mode. And that will select all the edges around that face. Now this chamfer would be very small, because that's a little too small, but I want to see it in context about right there. This is modern. For furniture, it's got kind of crisp, sharp edges, so that looks great. And now, because this is just poly, we can just simply copy it down as an element or as its own object and make the rest of the drawers right. Make sure that gap is there. Now the bottom two, we will split the difference between this space here, and it's a little taller than the actual piece, so these jurors will be pretty big. Probably right about there and right about there. So that's pretty good eyeballing. That'll work just fine for us. Okay, there's the front of the drawers. Okay. Now these track doors over here are the sliding doors. Let's make a little track for them. Right. Let's go to our side view here. And let's just make a rectangle about like that, and then convert it to a net spline going to vertice mode. I always like to make these all into corners like so, and then get this in the right place, and we could just make that render a ball spline and go to rectangle, not radial obviously, but slide it into place. Obviously way too big right now, so let's just start adjusting till that track looks about right. Let's get that down to the right size. Continue to adjust. Continue to adjust. Okay, that's not in the right place actually, so let's go back to it right. You make sure rectangle's in the right location, make sure in sub-object vertice mode. Okay, I don't want it to be quite so thick still. Should just be a real tight little track or a door. Let's put it right out here on the edge like that. K convert to poly, because we're going to use the tools again. I love the poly tools. If you can't tell, so select that one edge there, and then we can just do a ring on it. Like Beyonce said, put a ring on it. You guys know about that. Okay, here we go. Yeah. Ring and connect. So we went to the connectable, brought up the dialog window, and we're connecting it twice, and let's slide it out to the edges. We'll like that about like that. Okay? So if these are tools you're not familiar with, then this is a great primer for you. Get chamfer. That's what we want. Okay, so those two. Yes, that is what we want. For what I was starting to say is this is a great primer for you just to show the basic ways in which you can use all these tools are all super handy. Okay, so we're taking those new loops we made and we're chamfering them just to spread them apart, basically. So now we have track 1 and track 2, and what we can do is take these edges reading again. And what that's doing is selecting the one over on the side, all the way in a ring. Okay, basic polymodeling stuff. Then hold on Control and select Face K, and that selects all the faces that are attached to the edges that I previously had selected, which is exactly what we want. And now we extrude it slightly, ever so slightly, by local normal K. It'll start at 10 by default. If you right-click on that, it'll set it to 0 for us, and then we can go a little bit negative. So right about there. Can we have our tracks for Adoras perfectly set up in the next video? or the doors of some hardware. And I had some plagues.